Blue Boy, the latest tale from the AIHI book series, is a heartfelt story of an extraordinary friendship, truly one of a kind.
Enjoy this free story and invite a friend to listen with you.
It began on an ordinary early morning in Cambridge, Maryland, the kind of slow gray day that made time feel entangled, unable to pursue its forward trajectory at its regular speed and in a straight line. In the small maternity ward of Dorchester General, the hospital's rhythms ticked quietly, nurses making rounds and doctors murmuring through shift changes. But inside Delivery Room 3, something quietly extraordinary was unfolding. Victoria, a young woman not yet 30, was giving birth to her first child after a long and exhausting labor that started the night before. The delivery itself was textbook. No complications, no sudden alarms. The baby emerged in all the right positions. Head first, limbs strong, color good, a near-perfect APGAR score. Everything appeared normal until he opened his tiny eyes. He gazed around, like he was looking for something or someone. The cry came, sharp, clear, and necessary. The newborn's lungs inflated with the sting of cold air, his body adjusting to its new, foreign environment. But even as the medical staff nodded in relief and noted vital signs, one person in the room froze. Miss Ramatu, the attending nurse that morning, felt something shift inside her. A registered nurse from Sierra Leone, studying part-time to become a nurse practitioner, she was no stranger to delivery rooms. She had helped bring hundreds of babies into the world. But this baby, he wasn't looking around in the startled, disoriented way newborns sometimes do. His eyes were focused, searching even. He furrowed his brow. There was no medical term for the look on his face. Ms. Ramatu found herself gripping the edge of the bassinet, unable to turn away. This was not confusion, not fear. This baby looked heartbroken. She heard herself whisper it before she even realized the words had formed. Blue Boy. Not for the color of his skin, which was pink and healthy, but for something else entirely, an emotional hue, an invisible sadness, a look that no newborn should carry. The name Blue Boy stuck. The medical team, half curious and half amused, began using it informally, even as they closely monitored the baby. He was strong. He latched well. His reflexes were perfect. But apparent sadness was undeniably unusual. With Victoria's full consent, the hospital extended the newborn's stay to 4 days, a rare move, and one that reflected just how unsettled the staff felt. Miss Ramatu wasn't the only one disturbed by what she saw. The attending pediatrician ordered a series of neurological assessments. A developmental specialist came in from Annapolis. Psychologists were consulted. Brain scans, reflex tests, responsiveness. Everything pointed to a healthy infant. Still, the baby never quite looked at anyone. Or rather, he looked through them and seemed to be more interested in finding the something or someone he missed at his very first breath. One psychologist, a gray-bearded man who had studied infant behavior for decades, leaned back in his chair after an hour of observation and said, "It's as if he knows something we don't." No one could argue. Though no diagnosis was made, the possibility of early neurodevelopmental differences was quietly acknowledged. Autism, or some placement along the autistic spectrum, was mentioned as a theoretical possibility. Although it was far too early to draw any conclusions, the hospital recommended that Victoria pursue follow-up developmental screenings. A list of local resources was included in her discharge packet. On the 4th day, Victoria was discharged. Her friend Linda arrived at the hospital to drive her home, bringing a warm coat and a small bouquet of tulips. The two women exchanged a quiet embrace as nurses gathered around them. Ramatu, standing by the door with her clipboard, walked them to the car. Before they left, she made sure Blue Boy was safely strapped in his car seat. She triple-checked the belt, even adjusted the tiny strap beneath his chin. Blue Boy mood has not changed, the same sad and pensive look. Victoria turned to her with tired, grateful eyes. "He's healthy, right?" she asked. Not in a worried tone, but a searching one. Ms. Ramatu hesitated, then smiled gently. "Yes," she said, "he's healthy." But what she thought, and could not say, was, "He's more than that, or maybe less. I don't know yet." As the car pulled away into the misty afternoon, Ms. Ramatu remained at the curb for a few seconds longer than she needed to. The spring air was damp, the streets slick with puddles. Inside the hospital, the staff returned to their routines. Babies were still being born. Charts still needed updating, but Blue Boy left something behind in that room. A silence that lingered, a mystery that no medical record could explain. The child had gone home. There were no further complications, no emergencies, no reason to panic. But deep inside, Blue Boy Mom was worried. So was Ms. Ramadu. This newborn seemed to carry a sadness much older than himself. The case was closed, but the story, his story, had only just begun. The seasons passed gently in Cambridge. Rain gave way to summer heat and summer to the quiet burn of autumn. Then snow came, and the gray skies returned. But through it all, Blue Boy remained unchanged, a small, solemn presence in a world that seemed too loud and too fast for him. He grew, of course. He gained weight, sat up and rolled over. His milestones arrived on time or were close enough not to cause alarm. But emotionally, he remained distant, as if someone had dimmed his light. He rarely smiled. When they came, the smiles were fleeting and incomplete. There was no sparkle in them, no feeling of joy. His internal melody was played in minor chords. Victoria watched him closely, day after day, year after year. She spoke to him in soft tones, held him with care, read him books with bright pictures, and sang lullabies that echoed through the quiet corners of their modest home. But Blue Boy, as she had come to call him, almost unconsciously absorbed everything in silence. He seemed to observe the world as if from behind a translucent glass. There was no tantrum when his toys were taken away. In the first place, playtime was short. He seemed to enjoy being alone, apparently doing nothing, lost in his thoughts. No squeal of joy at a pet's touch or a balloon floating through the air. Instead, there was a quiet that bordered on haunting. As a baby, he sometimes sheds tears, real, glistening tears, without crying. No sound, no strain on his face, just tears that slipped down his cheeks slowly and inexplicably, like rain sliding down a window pane. The first time Victoria noticed it, she felt a chill run through her. She had been feeding him in the early morning light, the bottle nestled in her hand, his tiny fingers curled around her thumb. He wasn't fussing. He wasn't in pain. But there it was, a single tear tracing its way from the corner of his eye to his temple. Then another. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. "Are you sad?" she whispered, as if he could answer. He blinked, looked past her, and of course did not respond. She turned her head away and shed a few tears, afraid that her son would never experience joy like any other kid. She brought it up at his next well-baby visit, struggling to describe it without sounding alarmist. "He cries, but without crying. It's like tears just come, but not from pain, not from anything, really." Blue Boy pediatrician frowned thoughtfully and, erring on the side of caution, referred her to an otolaryngologist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, to rule out physical causes. Perhaps it was a blocked tear duct, a condition known to cause excess tearing in infants. The appointment was made, tests were done, probes, lights, scopes. The specialist, a serious man with kind eyes, eventually leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "There's no obstruction," he said. "His lacrimal system is perfectly open. He's producing tears normally. They're just coming without stimulus. It's rare, but not unheard of. Some children are sensitive to light, to wind, to a bunch of other random things." Victoria nodded, but deep down she knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't about the ducts or the wind or the room's brightness. It was about something else entirely. Something no scan could reveal, no chart could track. Her son was sad. Existentially sad in a way that seemed to predate him. Even as he began to speak, slowly, softly, and in fragments, his voice carried the weight of someone who never quite wanted to say what he really felt. Words were functional, not expressive. He never said happy. He never said fun. And when he said mama, it felt more like acknowledgement than affection. He was not cruel. He was never disobedient. But there was a solemnness to his presence that filled a room, transforming playful spaces into sacred ones. Even other children sensed it. They would approach him cautiously on the playground, offer toys, try to include him in their laughter. Sometimes he would nod. Sometimes he would accept the toy. But he never joined the laughter, never added to the noise. At night, Victoria would stand at the doorway to his room, watching his small chest rise and fall under the quilt. His face, even during sleep, bore a kind of melancholic calm, like someone who had seen too much of the world and was waiting for it to make sense. No one had an explanation. No one ever did. Blue Boy had turned 5. He was small for his age, delicate in both body and temperament, still carrying the same quiet gravity he had been born with. Victoria had long accepted that her son was unlike other children, though she couldn't quite stop searching for answers, or hoping that someone, someday, might have one. That year, their longtime pediatrician retired, leaving Victoria feeling suddenly unmoored. Dr. Penn had been calm, consistent, and never dismissive. He hadn't solved the riddle of Blue Boy, but he had never treated her concerns as hysteria. Now she would have to start again with a new pediatrician, explaining, justifying, watching for the polite disbelief in another stranger's eyes. Her first appointment with the new doctor's office was scheduled for a morning in early fall. The air was brisk, the sky heavy with clouds. Victoria dressed Blue Boy in his favorite navy sweater, brushed his soft curls, and packed a small bag of snacks and books for the waiting room. As always, he didn't complain. He rarely did. He moved like someone fulfilling a quiet duty. They arrived on time. Victoria signed them in and sat stiffly in the clean, modern waiting room of the new clinic. She was nervous, not about Blue Boy's health, but about having to tell Blue Boy's story. After a short wait, a cheerful nurse called them in. Vitals were taken, weight recorded. Blue Boy stood obediently, letting himself be measured without a word. The nurse smiled at him, then turned to Victoria. "Your provider will be in shortly. She'll go over everything with you." "She?" Victoria blinked, distracted by the pronoun. She hadn't been told the new doctor was a woman. That small detail made her nervous for no clear reason, perhaps because it added one more unknown to an already unfamiliar situation. Then came a knock at the door. It opened, and the world seemed to shift. "Victoria?" came the voice, warm, accented, unmistakable. There, standing in a white coat and soft gray head wrap, was her new pediatrician, Ms. Ramatu, nurse practitioner. Victoria's heart stuttered. It took a moment for recognition to bloom fully, but when it did, it came with a flood of emotion. Ms. Ramatu, the nurse who had stood beside her 5 years ago, who had whispered Blue Boy into the sterile air of the delivery room, was now a nurse practitioner. And she was here. She would be caring for him again. Ms. Ramatu's smile was quiet, knowing. Her eyes drifted to the boy sitting silently on the exam table. "I never forgot him," she said softly, addressing Victoria. "Or you." Victoria stood, uncertain how to react. It was such a wonderful surprise. In her confusion, she reached out and took Ms. Ramatu's hand. "You're his new doctor?" she asked. "NP," she quickly corrected. "For now, yes," Ms. Ramatu nodded, "and I couldn't be more honored to be his nurse practitioner." Blue Boy, hearing the gentle tone in Ms. Ramatu's voice, looked up and met her eyes. Something flickered. Not quite recognition, not quite interest, but something. Ms. Ramatu knelt beside him, not rushing, not speaking too brightly. She simply said, "You've grown. I remember you." He said nothing, but he did not look away. Victoria sat down slowly, her shoulders easing for the first time that morning. "I was nervous about starting over," she confessed. "I didn't want to explain his situation all over again." "You don't have to," Ms. Ramatu said. "I remember everything. I've thought of him often, and I've learned a great deal since that day." She began to review his chart, but her attention never fully left Blue Boy. Her movements were calm, deliberate, not clinical, but intentional. She asked gentle questions. She made no assumptions. She treated his silences with respect, not impatience. "He still doesn't smile much," Victoria offered after a while. "I see that," Ms. Ramatu replied, "and he's still carrying something. I don't know what it is yet, but I want to help you understand it." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, loosening, a lightening. For 5 years she had carried the invisible weight of her son's difference mostly alone. Now it seemed she wouldn't have to. As the appointment wrapped up, Miss Ramatu placed a hand over Victoria's. "Let's not rush to label him. Let's watch. Let's listen. Let's give him space to show us who he is, on his own time." Victoria nodded, and for the first time in a long time she felt something close to hope. As they left the clinic, Blue Boy glanced back once at Miss Ramatu. He didn't wave, but he paused and he really looked at her. And Miss Ramatu smiled, whispering under her breath, "He remembers." Two months had passed since Ms. Ramatu re-entered their lives. In that time, Victoria had come to feel more supported, less alone in the invisible work of raising a child who felt perpetually elsewhere. Blue Boy, now called Michael more often than not, though the nickname lingered, had not changed dramatically. He remained quiet, solemn, strangely sensitive to tone and touch. But there were small moments. A pause. A glance, a moment of stillness where it felt like he was listening in a new way, a more normal way. Victoria clung to those moments. Their next appointment with Ms. Ramatu fell on a chilly December afternoon. The air outside was sharp, the clinic full of the sounds of sniffles and winter coats being unzipped. Michael walked beside his mother without protest, his hands tucked into his jacket sleeves, his soft curls flattened slightly by his hood. Inside the exam room, Miss Ramatu greeted them with the same warm steadiness she had shown before. She knelt again to Michael's level, offered him a quiet smile, and then turned her attention to Victoria. "How have things been?" she asked gently, folding her hands. Victoria hesitated, then exhaled. "He's been having dreams," she said. "Or maybe nightmares. I don't know. They wake him up. He comes into my room sometimes. Other times I hear him talking in his sleep, whispering." Ms. Ramatu leaned forward slightly. "At first I thought it was just normal kid stuff," Victoria went on. "Too many cartoons or something he overheard. But it keeps happening. It's the same dream, over and over." "What does he say about it?" Victoria looked down at her hands. "He says he has a friend, a lost friend, not from school, not from daycare. He just says, 'My friend is lost. He doesn't know how to come back.'" Ms. Ramatu's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened slightly. "Has he ever described this friend?" "Only that the friend is far away. Sometimes he says the friend is stuck somewhere with no sky. Once he said the friend is looking for the door and can't find it." Ms. Ramatu paused. She turned slowly toward Michael, who had climbed onto the exam table and was sitting cross-legged, tracing the seams of the paper sheet with his fingers. "Michael," she said softly, "is your friend still lost?" He looked up at her. His eyes were as clear and solemn as the day he was born. "Yes," he said. Ms. Ramatu nodded slowly. "Can you talk to your friend in the dream?" Michael tilted his head, considering the question. "Sometimes, but I can't help him. He's not where I am." Ms. Ramatu did not press further. She let the silence rest in the room like a layer of dust. Later, when Michael was occupied in the hallway with a stack of waiting room blocks, Ms. Ramatu and Victoria spoke quietly. "These dreams may mean something," Ms. Ramatu said. "Children express emotion in symbols. Loss, isolation, disconnection. It often shows up in dreams before it can appear in language." Victoria nodded, but her worry clung to her words. "Do you think the friend is real?" Ms. Ramatu paused. "I think the feeling is real, and that matters." She made a note in Michael's file, recurrent dreams, themes of loss, and circled it. Not as a red flag, but as a signpost, something to come back to. "Let's not panic," she said, "but let's not ignore it either." Victoria left the clinic with Michael's small hand tucked in hers, her heart both heavier and lighter. The mystery was still there, the sadness, the silence. But for the first time, she felt like someone else was walking the path beside her. And in the back of her mind, one thought circled quietly: who is the friend, and what is he trying to say? Miss Ramatu had long since learned that the work of healing often began in silence, in the unspoken, the unresolved, the unexplained. Michael, the boy once called Blue Boy, had taught her that truth more deeply than any textbook ever could. After the second visit with Victoria and Michael, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The dreams, the solemn eyes, the tears without crying. He lingered in her mind even after clinic hours, in quiet moments when the memory of his expression would drift into her thoughts like fog. There was something unfinished about him, something waiting. She decided to speak with someone she trusted. Dr. Amina Johnson was a developmental psychologist with a background in pediatric behavioral medicine and a long-standing curiosity about the emotional lives of young children. She had published widely, taught courses at nearby universities, and maintained a private practice in Annapolis, MD. But more importantly, she has a very sharp brain and has a genuine interest in her work, not just to publish articles, but to solve problems. They met in a quiet consultation room at the clinic. Ms. Ramatu brought only a slim folder. "I've been following a child," she began. "His name is Michael, though was known to many of us as Blue Boy. I was there at his birth." Dr. Johnson, poised in a soft gray blazer, folded her hands and listened without interruption as Ms. Ramatu presented Michael's case. The newborn's expression, the prolonged hospital stay, the unexplainable sadness, the dreams of a lost friend. When Miss Ramatu mentioned the tearfulness without sound, the long-standing flat affect, and the absence of overt trauma, Dr. Johnson leaned forward, eyes sharp with recognition. "I remember reading a study," she said. "There's growing evidence of what's being called prenatal emotional imprinting, a kind of fetal programming. In some cases, children exposed to prolonged maternal stress during pregnancy display signs resembling early-onset PTSD. They carry emotional residue, grief, fear, anxiety, even if their environment after birth is stable." Miss Ramatu furrowed her brow. "You mean the child inherits trauma that isn't directly theirs?" "In a way," Dr. Johnson nodded. "Think of it as a wound without a visible scar. It's not abuse or neglect. It's something quieter. High cortisol exposure, unresolved grief in the mother, even emotional isolation. The fetus is responsive to the emotional landscape of the womb, and sometimes they remember." Ms. Ramatu let that sit. Then she said, "Would you be willing to see him?" Dr. Johnson smiled gently. "I'd be honored." A week later, Victoria sat with both women in a softly lit office with bookshelves lining every wall. Michael was nearby, sorting wooden animal shapes in silence. His fingers moved methodically, his face unreadable. Dr. Johnson began gently, asking Victoria to recount the pregnancy. "Was it planned?" "No," Victoria admitted, "but I was happy when I found out." "Were you under stress during the pregnancy? Any major changes? Losses? Fears?" Victoria shook her head slowly, brows drawing together. "I mean, nothing dramatic. No car accidents. No deaths. I had some money worries, but who doesn't? I was alone, sure, but I didn't feel broken. I was healthy. I walked every day. I played music for him." Dr. Johnson nodded, probing deeper. "Did you feel afraid at any point? Unsupported? Did anything change in how you felt about the pregnancy as it progressed?" Victoria paused then. She looked down at her hands as if searching them for memory. "There was one day," she said finally. "I was about 5 months pregnant. I was walking to the store, and I passed this church, and for some reason I just broke down. I sat on the curb and cried. Not loud, just crying. For maybe an hour. I didn't know why." Dr. Johnson didn't flinch. "And what did you feel in your body that day?" "Alone," Victoria whispered. "Not scared, not sad, just like I was already failing him, like I was giving birth to something I couldn't protect." No one spoke for a moment. Michael continued stacking the animals, arranging them in 2 neat lines that faced each other but never touched. Dr. Johnson turned back to Ms. Ramatu and said quietly, "This may be it, not a trauma in the clinical sense, but an emotional wound, one that left a trace." Victoria blinked. "You think he remembers that?" "I think he felt it," Dr. Johnson said, "and I think that's where we begin." The room was dark, quiet. Victoria had fallen asleep with her hand gently resting on Michael's back. He had crept into her bed again sometime after midnight, as he often did when he was having nightmares. He never said he was afraid. He never whimpered or cried out, but she always knew. The tension in his small body, the way his eyes fluttered beneath the lids as if chasing something just beyond reach. That night, as the wind rattled faintly against the bedroom window, Michael dreamed again. But this dream was different. He was floating, suspended in a thick, warm silence. His limbs moved slowly, like an underwater plant. He was small, smaller than he had ever been, and surrounded by a soft, pulsing light that seemed to glow from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the vibrations, a low, steady hum, rising from below him, above him, inside him. The sound wasn't painful, not exactly, but it shook him to his core. It was the sound of being watched, the sound of being measured, prodded, scanned. It wasn't a voice, but it was trying to say something. It was too loud for silence and too soft for speech. Michael curled slightly in the dream, instinctively trying to shield himself from the waves. They weren't hurting him, but they made him feel exposed, seen, like someone was staring into him, through him, like someone had opened a curtain on a stage. And he was too small to hide. And then he saw his friend, at first just a shape, barely more than a shadow. The friend had no face, no name, but Michael recognized him with a strange certainty only dreams allow. The friend was walking, barefoot, across a bizarre landscape that shimmered like glass but rippled like water. He was looking around, turning in circles, arms outstretched, lost. Michael tried to call out to him, not with words, but with will, with urgency. But the vibrations grew louder. The air shook, the light trembled. His friend could not hear him. Michael's friend stopped walking and looked around as if he had heard something, a whisper in a language only they shared. His face remained blurry, but his body sagged with confusion. He turned again, walked toward a door that wasn't there. Michael floated closer, reached out, but just as his fingers neared his friend's shoulder, the world twisted. The vibration spiked, louder, sharper now, and the warmth that had once wrapped around him became heavy, suffocating. The friend faded into a blur of light and static. And then he woke up. Michael sat up, breathing quickly but silently. The room was dark again, real, but the sensation lingered. The hum still echoed in his bones. He pressed his hands to his chest as if to quiet something inside him. Victoria stretched beside him. Her hand brushed his back. "Are you okay?" she whispered, eyes still half closed. Michael didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "He's still looking." She didn't ask who. She knew. Michael lay back down, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling as the shadows danced above them. He could still feel the hum, not in his ears, but in his memory. And somewhere inside, he knew the friend would come again. The dreams would return. The door was still closed. The path was still lost. And the vibrations, like echoes from long ago, were still trying to say something he hadn't yet learned how to hear. Victoria arrived early for the doctor's appointment. Michael sat beside her in the waiting room, his legs dangling just above the floor, his gaze fixed on the silent aquarium in the corner. Inside, orange and silver fish moved in slow loops, unbothered by time. He watched them with his usual stillness, but Victoria could feel the tension in him, not the usual quiet weight he carried, but something closer to electricity. She knew why. When Miss Ramatu finally called them in, Victoria followed quickly, grateful to escape the sterile hum of the lobby. Michael, as always, walked without protest, his hand brushing briefly against the wall as they moved down the hallway. Once inside the exam room, Ms. Ramatu offered her familiar gentle smile and gestured for them to sit. "You said you had something important to share?" Victoria nodded, settling into the chair. "Actually, 2 things." Ms. Ramatu raised an eyebrow, her expression alert but unhurried. "The first," Victoria began, "is about a dream, another dream, one of the strongest yet." She recounted the strange sensory vividness of the vibrations like sonogram waves, the sense of being back in the womb, the lost friend, the invisible door. Michael Blueboy hadn't described it in whole words, but the way he spoke about it afterward, the way he described the feeling, made it unmistakably powerful. Ms. Ramatu listened intently. Her pen was ready to take notes on the chart in her lap. "I've been thinking about those vibrations," Victoria added. "He said they were shaking him, like they were trying to say something. It woke him up. He looked terrified, but he wouldn't cry." Ms. Ramatu nodded slowly. Sometimes sensations in dreams aren't symbolic. They're remembered, felt. The body stores information the mind can't explain. "I thought that too," Victoria said. "But something else happened, and I don't know what to make of it." Miss Ramatu leaned forward attentively. Tell me. Victoria took a breath. 3 days ago, an old friend of mine came to visit. Her name's Esther. We haven't seen each other in years, not since before I had my baby. We'd lost touch for a long time, but she was driving through Cambridge and stopped in. Miss Ramatu blinked. She'd never met Michael before? Never, Victoria said. Not once, and as far as I know, he had no idea who she was. I didn't even tell him she was coming. It was all last minute. And how did he respond? Victoria hesitated. He changed. The moment she stepped into the house, he went stiff, then agitated. He started pacing the room, murmuring to himself. His eyes wouldn't leave her, and he's never reacted like that to anyone before. Ms. Ramatu's brow furrowed. Agitated how? Like he was remembering something. He was breathing fast, hands twitching. But the strange part that really shocked me is that after a few minutes he walked right up to her and touched her belly. Just reached out and put his hand on her belly. Miss Ramatu sat still. Blue Boy doesn't like to be touched, as you know. He does not touch people either, Victoria went on, her voice tightening. He pulls away from me sometimes, and here he was, touching a stranger, her stomach of all things. Did he say anything? Victoria nodded slowly. He's not here, she whispered. That's what I think I heard him say. He's not here anymore. Then he looked right at Esther and said, he left. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Michael, who had been absent-mindedly flipping through a picture book on the floor, stopped turning the pages. Ms. Ramatu closed her folder. Victoria, she said softly, I want to meet Esther. I thought you might. And I want to ask you something personal. Okay. Is it possible, Miss Ramatu said gently, that you and Esther were ever pregnant at the same time? Even briefly? Victoria's eyes widened. Her lips parted. A tremble ran through her. How did you know? Yes, we were. Miss Ramatu sat back, thoughtful. There may be more to this than we've realized. Michael returned to his book as if the moment had never happened. But Victoria, now shaken and breathless, knew they had stepped closer to something. A memory, perhaps. A memory in the fabric of her son. The meeting took place quietly, without ceremony. No official appointment, no forms, just 3 women and a child sitting in the soft light of Miss Ramatu's consultation room on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Esther had agreed to come without hesitation, not out of curiosity, but from something else, something heavier. She didn't ask many questions when Victoria called. She simply said, yes, I'll be there. When she entered the room, Miss Ramatu noticed it immediately. The way her body stiffened, then softened. Her steps slowed. Her eyes shifted, not toward the adults, but toward Michael. He was seated in the corner, leafing through a stack of flashcards with pictures of animals and foods, as he often did when the world around him felt uncertain. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze had already found her. Esther stopped. She looked at him, and something in her face, tight at first, composed, began to change. Sadness. It didn't arrive suddenly, but with quiet, unbearable weight. Her jaw trembled slightly, though she said nothing. Her eyes glassed over, and she pressed her lips tightly together, as if to hold something in. Victoria stood awkwardly beside her, unsure whether to speak. Esther, this is Ms. Ramatu. She's Michael's provider. Esther nodded to Ms. Ramatu politely, then looked back at the boy. Ms. Ramatu watched the exchange closely. Esther, would you like to sit down? She nodded again slowly and took a seat on the far side of the room, but her eyes never left Michael. Victoria, breaking the silence, said gently, He reacted to you the other day, in a way I've never seen. He doesn't usually get close to people. Esther gave a short, breathless sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Her shoulders hunched inward. He would have been the same age, she said. Ms. Ramatu leaned forward slightly. Your child? Esther's mouth opened, then closed again. She nodded faintly. Victoria turned to her, startled. Esther, I never knew. I thought maybe you moved or changed clinics. You just stopped coming. Esther didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to her lap, where her fingers were tightening slowly around the strap of her purse. It was late in the second trimester, she finally said. Everything had been fine. Then I stopped feeling movement. I didn't tell anyone right away. I think part of me didn't want it to be real. She swallowed hard, her voice lowered. By the time I went in, there was nothing they could do. No heartbeat, no explanation. Silence bloomed in the room like fog. Victoria covered her mouth with her hand. "Esther, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Esther shook her head. "I didn't tell anyone. Not really. I dropped out of everything. I couldn't go back to that clinic. Couldn't sit in the waiting room and see the other moms. I couldn't look at you. You were still whole." Her voice broke on the last word. She turned slightly away, wiping her cheek. Michael, still sitting quietly, stood up. He walked slowly toward Esther and stopped just a few feet away. She looked at him. He looked back. And something in his expression, that quiet, ancient gaze, made her breath catch. He didn't accuse her. He didn't speak. He simply looked. Esther's lips parted. Her hands were tense. She glanced at Victoria, then at Ms. Ramatu. Then she spoke again. "That's not the whole story," she whispered. "I said I lost the baby, but that's not what happened." The room grew impossibly still. Esther exhaled, long and shaking. "My husband left me for one of my best friends. Just walked out. He said he wasn't ready, said he never wanted the baby. And after he left, I couldn't stop seeing him, in the baby, in the future, in every dream I had." She paused, voice breaking. "I started feeling like I couldn't do it alone. I felt shame, rage. I felt like the child was his, not mine, his seed, his claim on my body." Victoria sat frozen, eyes wide, but she didn't interrupt. Esther's eyes moved again to Michael, and for a moment her voice softened. "So I ended it. I told myself it was the only way to survive." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them. "I thought I could move on, but I didn't. I thought it would fade, but it didn't." Michael, still standing beside her, reached out, slowly, gently, and placed his small hand on her forearm. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. A silence passed between them that said more than any words. Esther lowered her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Michael's hand remained calm and steady. Then quietly he turned and walked back to his seat, picked up a flashcard and turned it over. Esther looked at Ms. Ramatu. "Do you think he knows?" Ms. Ramatu's voice was steady, full of grace. "I think some part of him remembers, and I think some part of you has too, even if you tried not to." Victoria reached over and took Esther's hand. No one moved for a long time. No one needed to. Michael had never been alone in his sadness, and now neither were they. The exam room was quiet. It was the same room where Victoria had sat all those years ago, swollen with hope and fear, flipping through pamphlets while Esther waited beside her. The same cold vinyl chairs, the same beige curtains. Even the faint lemony scent of antiseptic cleaner felt eerily familiar. Ms. Ramatu had requested the lighting be soft. No buzzing fluorescents, no medical tools in view, just a chair for Michael, a seat for Victoria, and a wall-mounted camera rolling discreetly from a corner. The first session was simple. Victoria and Michael entered together. She sat in the same chair she'd used countless times before. Michael walked slowly around the space, pausing to look at the corners, the walls, and the outdated poster of fetal development that hadn't changed in over a decade. He didn't speak, but his hands moved constantly, brushing against the edges of the chair, running along the table's smooth surface. His eyes flicked from one object to the next, pausing every so often as though something was trying to break through. Ms. Ramatu, watching remotely in real time, leaned forward. Michael sat down at one point. His hands folded, and he looked at the chair next to his mother, then away. It was as if he were trying, genuinely trying, to remember. But nothing came. No reaction. No words. Just a quiet, puzzled ache that hung in the air like mist. The second session was different. From the beginning, Michael seemed uneasy. Not resistant, but unsettled. Ms. Ramatu had instructed Victoria to behave normally, as if nothing were different from the first visit. She did. 5 minutes into the session, a soft knock came at the door. Esther entered. She said nothing, just stepped into the space quietly, her arms crossed, eyes cautious, and that's when it happened. Michael turned to look at her and froze. His entire body stiffened. His eyes locked on her with a recognition that went beyond anything logical. His lips parted, and for a moment there was no sound. Then came the cry. It was sudden, deep. Not a child's cry, not frustration or fear, but a grief cry, ancient, raw, primal. He screamed, fell to his knees, then stood again, his fists clenched at his sides, tears pouring down his face in a torrent. He wept like a mother who had lost her child. Miss Ramatu's heart stopped as she watched it unfold through the monitor. Her notes fell from her lap. Michael sobbed without restraint, rocking slightly, repeating words that were mainly unintelligible, fragments, cries of why, of where, of no. Esther couldn't move. Her hand had flown to her mouth, her face drained of all color. Victoria instinctively rose, but stopped when Michael raised his hand, not to push her away, but to hold the space. He wasn't in danger. But he was in something. Something so profound that no adult in the room could fully name it. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Michael sank to the floor, curled himself, and breathed in silence, still crying, but softly now, as if something had been released. Ms. Ramatu exhaled. Her hands trembled. Esther stepped back slowly. Her eyes were wet, too. Victoria knelt beside her son, unsure whether to speak, to hold him, or simply be there. Michael didn't speak again that day. But everything had changed. After the meeting in Miss Ramatu's office, Esther went home to Laurel, Delaware. Her goodbye was soft-spoken but sincere. She hugged Victoria gently at the door and nodded toward Michael with a look that carried both apology and affection. "I'll stay in touch," she said, "with both of you." Victoria believed her. Something had changed in Esther. Something had settled. Michael said nothing, but he watched her leave, not with sadness, not with joy, but with the same quiet attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Ms. Ramatu stood by the window a moment longer after the door clicked shut. Though the session was officially over, she wasn't finished. She couldn't be. She hadn't written a single note during the meeting, but her mind was filled with them. She moved slowly through her routine that afternoon, distracted. Her thoughts circled the room like birds with no place to land. Something about the meeting gnawed at her. The weight of unspoken things. The way Michael had touched Esther. The words he had said days earlier. "He's not here anymore, he left." It was absurd, completely unscientific, and yet. Later that evening, she called Victoria. "Can I ask you something strange?" she said. "Go ahead. During your pregnancy, how often did you and Esther go to the clinic together?" Victoria didn't even pause. "Almost every single visit. Did you sit together?" "Always," she said. "We made a thing of it. Same chairs, same jokes. We'd compare notes on snacks and heartburn. It was one of the few parts of pregnancy I actually enjoyed." Ms. Ramatu pressed her lips together. "And the sonograms? Side by side, a few times even in the same room, back-to-back appointments. Why?" Ms. Ramatu didn't answer, because the answer forming in her mind was ridiculous, ludicrous, unprovable. But still, she couldn't shake it. What if the lost friend was real, not imagined, not symbolic? What if the sadness Michael carried wasn't just emotional residue, but a memory, not of trauma, but of companionship? What if, and she could barely allow herself to think it, what if two unborn children had somehow connected? No, impossible. She was a medical professional, a nurse practitioner, not a mystic. And yet, the way Michael had touched Esther's belly that day, the way he had looked at her, not like a stranger, but like someone he had once known, it haunted her. She couldn't say any of it aloud, she wouldn't. But she could observe. That was her training, that was her right. So she reached out to the retired OB/GYN who had managed both Victoria's and Esther's pregnancies. The doctor, though no longer practicing, remembered both women clearly. They were always together, she recalled over the phone, friendly, inseparable for a while. Miss Ramatu explained, cautiously, that she was conducting an observational follow-up. She asked for access to the same exam room where many of their prenatal appointments had taken place. The OB/GYN agreed to arrange the space. She herself would not be present, but she gave her permission for the session to be videotaped for Miss Ramatu's clinical review. It was an unusual request, but something in Miss Ramatu's voice, calm, professional, yet quietly urgent, earned trust. She devised the setup with care. First, Michael would visit the room with Victoria alone. Nothing clinical, no questions, just presence. Then another day, they would return, with Esther quietly introduced after a short delay. Ms. Ramatu wanted to observe Michael's reaction. to see or sense if anything stirred. Not just confusion or familiarity, but something more profound. Some recognition of a bond that had no name, no timeline, no explanation. She knew how it sounded, even to herself, but she needed to know, even if the answer made no sense. After the meeting in Ms. Ramatu's office, something unexpected happened. The silence that had stretched for years between Victoria and Esther gave way, not to confrontation, but to connection. Something about the truth being spoken finally allowed the two women to begin again. Their calls were not frequent, but steady, gentle check-ins, shared memories, a kind of healing only friendship can offer, imperfect, uneven, but real. Esther never got pregnant again. She didn't speak of it often, and Victoria didn't press, but once, over the phone, she said quietly, "I wasn't willing to take that kind of risk again. I knew what it could cost." Victoria understood. The wound Esther carried had become part of who she was, not visible, not raw, but still present. A quiet ache, never fully gone. The man who had left her, the father who might have been, hadn't lasted long with the woman he chose. That too was something they didn't dwell on. Life, in its strange and different way, had moved forward, and Michael, the boy once called Blue Boy, kept moving forward too, in his own way. He didn't change much. He remained reserved, distant, inward, but brilliant. He excelled in school from a young age, not through competition, not for recognition, but because knowledge gave him peace, order, space to breathe, but friendship, connection, those never came. He sat in classrooms full of chatter, bright lights, scraping chairs, and constant interruptions, and each day left him more drained than the one before. His teachers praised his mind, but always marked him as isolated, difficult to engage, socially detached. He tried, but the noise of adolescence, the chaos of youth, simply overwhelmed him. At 15, he came to Victoria one evening after dinner and said simply, "I want to stop." "Stop what?" she asked, not looking up from the dishes. "Regular school," he replied. "I want to take the GED and be done." Victoria turned to him, drying her hands with a towel. "Michael, that's not how this is supposed to go. You're not even 16. "I know," he said calmly, "but I've already learned what they're teaching. I've read ahead. I've tested myself. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for your support." She didn't answer right away. The thought of letting him skip those years, those messy, vital years, scared her. But then she looked at him. There was no rebellion in his eyes, no arrogance, just calm and clarity and something she could only describe as knowing. So she said yes. 3 months later, he passed the GED with near-perfect scores. By 16, Michael was ready for college. Victoria still wasn't. She said so, openly. "You're still a kid. You've never even gone to a party. You don't even know how to make friends." "I don't need a party to become who I am," he replied softly. "And maybe friendship isn't what I was made for." Those words stayed with her for a long time. But she enrolled him anyway, with hesitation, with fear, but also with pride. Not because she believed he was ready for the world, but because she had come to understand. The world in many ways had never been ready for him. Michael turned 18 on a quiet Saturday in late spring. There was no party, no celebration, just a simple dinner at home, a slice of cake, and a long silence that Victoria respected without question. He had always been quiet, thoughtful, different. But over the last few weeks, something has shifted in him, a restlessness she couldn't name, a weight behind his eyes that even she couldn't reach. What she didn't know was that Michael had been accepted to the Department of Biology at Salisbury University with a full scholarship. He had known for weeks, and for weeks he told no one. Most young people would have shouted the news, taken photos, and posted them to every corner of the internet. But Michael folded the acceptance letter neatly and tucked it in the back of a drawer. He looked at it sometimes like it was an artifact from a version of his life that might not exist after all. He had spent hours walking alone, thinking, questioning. How could a boy who carried the memory of someone who was never born join the very field that had quietly erased that life? Biology, medicine, science. These were the hands that had touched his mother's body, that had guided her friend into termination, that had given no voice to the presence he still remembered as his friend. He didn't hate doctors. Not exactly. He respected their knowledge, but he also feared their indifference, the clinical coldness that sometimes confused life with data, spirit with tissue. In his quiet turmoil, he had reached out to another group, a local organization devoted to protecting unborn life. They had welcomed him. They didn't ask too many questions. And though he still struggled to speak in large groups, he found something in their gatherings that stirred him. Conviction. Purpose. Mission. He attended 3 meetings. At one point, they asked if he wanted to help organize a silent vigil. At another, he was handed a pamphlet filled with quotes and photos. He didn't agree with everything, but he listened. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing somewhere, not floating. He was becoming a very important young man. The night before the deadline to accept the university's offer, Michael sat in his room, the letter in his lap. His hand hovered over the wastebasket, ready to dump it in the pile of trash and forever forget it. It would be easy, quiet, clean. He could walk away from that world, the world of white coats and soft lies and long silences. He could choose a path that felt loyal to the only friend he had ever lost. But before he could release the sheet of paper, his phone rang. Ms. Ramatu was on the other end of the line. He hadn't heard from her in weeks. Her voice on the other end was calm, steady, familiar. "Hello, Michael. How are you doing?" He hesitated before saying the usual, "I am okay." He was so surprised that Miss Ramatu, her guardian angel, picked this moment to give him a call. They talked for about a minute. Michael was hard to talk to face. It was even harder to get him fully engaged in a remote conversation. Just before they hung up, Miss Ramatu vaguely asked about which career he intended to pursue. She knew about the shortcut he took to finish high school earlier than the rest of his class. Michael didn't answer right away. He was still under the spell of the moment. How did she know he was debating whether he should accept the offer of the university and pursue a career in the field of biology or turn into an activist defending the cause of the unborn? Her voice remained in his head during the whole day. His own voice joined the chorus. You don't have to choose between loyalty and purpose. You can become the kind of scientist who doesn't forget what it means to carry the weight of someone unseen. He closed his eyes. There it was, the voice that had first whispered "Blue Boy" on the day he was born. The voice that had never dismissed what he couldn't explain. The voice that reminded him there was still space in the world for people like him. The next morning, Michael accepted the offer. He didn't tell anyone right away. But that fall, he moved quietly onto campus, walked into the lecture halls, and began learning the language of molecules and memory. He never stopped thinking about his friend, never stopped wondering what it all meant. He was still quiet, still strange to some, but he had found something worth becoming. And somewhere inside, deeper than memory, deeper than grief, he knew his friend had not disappeared. Years later, after Michael had finished his undergraduate degree and begun his graduate research in developmental biology, he returned one afternoon to the small town where he had first been called Blue Boy. He walked past the old clinic. It had been renovated, new windows, new sign, new staff, but the foundation was the same. The walls had once held the whispers of unborn lives, of choices made and unmade, of quiet waiting. He didn't go inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, watching the light shift across the doorway. He was not sad. He had long stopped trying to explain what had happened in that room when he was 6, or what had lived inside him even before that. Some questions were not meant to be answered with science. They were meant to be carried. He had carried his friend's memory not as a burden, but as a compass. It had pointed him toward truth, empathy, and restraint. It had kept him from becoming careless with life, any life. And through that weight, he had found his voice. He had become the kind of man who could hold sorrow without drowning in it. The kind of researcher who remembered that data once had a heartbeat. The kind of son who spends time with his mother every Sunday. The kind of friend who listens first. He had not forgotten. And though the world no longer called him Blue Boy, the name never left him entirely. It was there in the early morning light of the lab, in the sketch of a memory that no longer made him cry. It was there, not in grief but in presence. As the years passed, the name Blue Boy no longer fit the man he was becoming. Yet in quiet hours, he still spoke softly with his unseen companion, Little Boy, for whom he would always be, unchanged, eternal, Blue Boy.